So today we're gonna have some time for self-care. We're gonna have time to introduce myself, to introduce our program at the Violence Intervention Program. We're gonna go over our learning objectives, and we're gonna have our presentation. And after, we're gonna have some time for Q&A. Next one, Maria. All right, so I'm gonna take this moment to just tell you to please be kind to yourself. Today, we're speaking about two heavy topics, which is domestic violence and trauma. And for some of us, this could be very triggering. So I want you to take some time to take care of yourself. If you need to grab a glass of water, if you need to take a break in the middle of the presentation, that's okay. If you need to stretch, please do so. And we're not just going to talk about self-care, but we're going to practice it together. So Maria, can you please change the slide? Okay. So I'm going to invite you to just feel comfortable in your chair or wherever you're sitting. And I want you to just take some time to notice how stressed are you feeling right now from a 1 to 5. And you can share this in the chat with us. Okay, I see some 1s. That's good. I see some 3s. 2s. Okay, it's Friday. We're not that stressed today. It's Friday. 3 2s. Wonderful. We can go to the next slide. So now we're going to go into practicing a little grounding exercise. So for our grounding exercise today, I want you to bring your attention to your feet. So just bring attention to the top and the bottom of your feet. Notice whether your feet are feeling cold, or maybe there's part of your feet that are feeling grounded. Maybe they're feeling a little tingly sensation, or you can feel that they're tired from the commute this morning. Just notice your feet. Now you can go ahead and bring your awareness to your breathing. So I want you to just take a deep breath, just a couple of inhales and exhales. Let's do this together. Let's do it again. One more time. Good. So now in the next step, I want you to bring your attention to your throat, to your mouth, and try to gather some saliva in your mouth, and let's swallow. I will tell you why after. Good swallowing, okay. So now I want you to use the power of your imagination and try to imagine a place that makes you feel safe. It could be the beach, it could be a park or the mountains, maybe a place where you just feel comfortable and celebrated. So try to picture a space. Try to picture everything that you can see around you. It could be the waves, it could be the sand, it could be the sunshine in your skin, maybe something that you can feel. If you're picturing that you're like in your bed in a comfy place, maybe a cozy blanket or a teddy bear. You can also use your sense of smell. Is there anything in this space that you can smell, that you can listen to? If you notice that your body has started yawning or moving or for stretching, that means that your body is relaxing. So let's take one last deep breath. And we can go to the next page. So I want you to notice your body again after this exercise, and from a 1 to 5, rate how you're feeling right now. right? So I noticed for some people, you have decreased at least one time, one less or two less. That means that your body got into the mode of relaxation, and that's great. So what we did there is to create the awareness of your full body to ground you. We brought some oxygen into our brain with breathing. When we swallow, we let our nervous system know that it's okay to relax. And when we are imagine, we created a safe space around us. So now you have a new tool to use to manage stress. All right, so now that we have managed stress and we're feeling good, let's get started with our presentation. So who am I? My name is Michelle Balandra, and I am a limited license marriage family therapist. And I am the program manager for the Child and Adolescents program at BIP, the Violence Intervention Program. So I have been working with BIP for the last 5 years. And our program, I am excited to share that our program is the first clinical program in our organization. Our program was created during the pandemic, and it specifically supports children and their families that has experienced trauma, domestic violence, sexual abuse, or other type of traumas. In our program, we provide individual sessions, conjoined sessions. We also provide support group for teens, support group for parents, and we see children that are ages 3 to 18. So now let me introduce you BIP. Can we go to the next one, Maria? Thank you. So who are we? The Violence Intervention Program was founded in 1984. It is the only organization in New York City that is led by Latinas and for Latinx survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence. We provide a host of culturally affirming programs to support survivors as they recover from trauma and break intergenerational cycles of abuse and poverty. We provide, even though we are a culturally specific, we provide a cultural specific services, we do provide services to any survivor that needs our support. Our focus is to restore hope, rebuild lives, and redefine the future. Next slide, Maria. Thank you. So what do we do? BIP operates 3 community-based programs, social services program, one in Manhattan, one in Brooklyn, and one in the Bronx. We have 2 residential shelters and a housing program. We have a helpline and an innovative economic justice program, our sexual violence program, CAP, the Child and Adolescents program, and a robust community engagement team. I do want to encourage everyone to visit our website because it has been revamped and it looks so cute. It's the vipmujeres.org website, and you can see more information of the programs and services that we offer. Next slide, Maria. So for today, we are going to learn a couple of things. The first thing that we're going to focus is in understanding the impact of domestic violence in children and teens. We're going to understand the link between domestic violence and trauma, the signs of PTSD and trauma reactions in children, and we're going to learn how to support youth after experiencing DV. Oops. So first, I want to start by asking what comes to mind when we speak about domestic violence. You can share it in the chat. Yeah, I see love, distress, survival, emotional, verbal, physical harm, trauma, control. Yes. Interpersonal abuse, cycle of abuse, fear. Yeah. Genderless. Yes, it could happen to anyone. Okay, so you guys are ahead of the game. So we're just gonna go over it a little bit and then deep dive into what the impact of domestic violence in the children, right? Power and control, generational, psychological abuse, all of this is a big yes. So domestic violence, for those who don't know, is a pattern of coercive controlling behavior. It could happen in any type of relationship, family relationship, intimate partner relationship, in a dating relationship, and it's a dynamic where one person has control over the other person. It could happen to anyone. Domestic violence does not discriminate. It is an epidemic affecting multiple communities. It could happen regardless of age, gender, race, religion, nationality, immigration status, or educational background. Anyone can be a person causing harm, and anyone can be a victim or survivor of domestic violence. The impact of domestic violence on survivors and children is detrimental to our communities. Next. So some of the statistics are, I think it's always important to share the statistics because it really let us know how big the problem is. And more than 12 million people per year are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the US. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And the most surprising one is that 3.3 million to 10 million children are exposed to adult domestic violence each year. And 30 to 60% of people causing harm also abuse the children in the household. Next. So some of the tactics of abuse, a lot of you guys mentioned some of them, and many people usually recognize the physical violence, but we can see that there's a lot more. There's the sexual violence, emotional, psychological abuse, verbal abuse, using children as weapons. So I'm just gonna go through some of them to help those that don't know identify them. When it comes to physical violence, we can go back. When it comes to physical violence, anything that includes harm to the body or to the threats to personal space could be considered physical violence. That includes blocking the door, breaking things, because when somebody breaks something around you, what they're saying is, I can also do this to you. So things like pulling hair, pinching, shoving, displaying weapons, choking, kicking are considered physical violence. When it comes to sexual violence, we have forcing somebody to watch pornography, controlling the access to birth control, forcing someone to dress in a sexual way, or for them to be coerced or manipulated into agreeing to sex, forced sex, or rape. When it comes to emotional psychological abuse, we see isolation, silent treatment, extreme jealousy, gaslighting, or crazy making. We can see minimizing, denying, or threats. And threats could be something like, I'm going to threaten to take the kids away. I'm going to threaten to call immigration, to call ACS. We can also see verbal abuse that includes yelling, name calling, putting the other person down, hate speech. When it comes to using the children as weapons to gain control, we can see tactics such as transmitting a message to the victims of abuse. We can see persuading the children that the survivor parent is to blame for the separation of the family. We can see them use maybe having like specific gifts or presents or pets that they can only have in their house, or buying the loyalty of the children or their love through taking them to places or buying gifts for them. We can also see probably returning the children late or not returning them at all, or maybe not paying for child support, paying late or underpaying. We can also see in domestic violence the tactics of economic abuse. It happens almost in every abusive relationship. Statistics say that 98% of abusive relationships have some type of tactic of economic abuse. And that can look like controlling access to income, showing up to work and making them quit the job, telling them they cannot work, making them ask for an allowance, using their credit in a harmful way. In technological abuse, we can also see verbal abuse online, controlling phone usage, checking the phone all the time, controlling what apps they have, or maybe downloading an app that can track the person, and manipulating their social media. Next. All right, so when it comes to domestic violence, some people believe that the children are not impacted if they don't see things or they don't see physical abuse directly, but that is a myth. Children are impacted in many different ways. They can experience or witness abuse in many multiple ways, and that includes seeing the one parent being aggressive to the other, threatening or demanding, or not demanding, but saying mean things to the other person, putting them down. They can see one parent being angry, another parent being afraid. If they don't see it, they might listen, of what's happened, or they might see the injuries, or they might see one partner destroy the properties. The children might just live in fear that, just walking in eggshells, like something is going to happen, or fearing that another event is going to happen at any moment. The children might also be target of abuse directly, and they might get to the point where they want to intervene. They want to protect the person that is being harmed, the parent that is being harmed. So if they intervene, they might be unintentional injury to the children. Children might also start thinking that abuse is their fault. Even though they're not responsible for it, they might make themselves believe this, because children tend to internalize everything that they see. So when it comes to the caregivers are also affected by the domestic violence. So, well, not also, but they're mainly directly affected by the domestic violence. So their ability to give support and love can be negatively impacted. So their relationship and the love, support that they can give to the child is affected. Children can also be affected by normalizing violence. They might start believing that the way that they communicate with others using violence is okay, that they can get what they want by using violence, or that being controlling of others is okay, and they might end up repeating these same patterns. At the end, we can see that the children are lacking role models for healthy relationships, and they don't know what a healthy relationship is. So they can get into, once they become teenagers, they could go into dating violence. And once they become adults, they can repeat the cycles in different relationships. So when it comes to the impact of DV in children, we can see that children that have witnessed domestic violence have more difficulty controlling their emotions, more excessive worry, sensitivity to stress, to shame, to guilt, feeling helpless. They're twice more likely to experience depression, 3 times more likely to experience anxiety. They can have symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which we're going to learn about in a little bit. We can see that children have a suicide ideation or suicide attempts. We can also see that they have a negative self-image. They have a lot of difficulty talking positively about themselves, or the way that they view themselves is very negative. They're low self-esteem. They might be prone to more bullying, difficulty standing up for themselves. That's also something we can notice. When it comes to physical health, they could have a weak immune system, which can lead to them getting sick more often. We can see sleep disorders like sleepwalking, sleep paralysis, nightmares, or difficulty sleeping, eating disorders like bulimia, anorexia. We can see cardiovascular disease or shorter lifespan. Next. So when it comes to the impact of DV on the brain, we can see a lot of damage, right? And it starts with, we can see a smaller brain size, or also the brain gets impacted because of the repeated incidents of stress and trauma. The body goes into a stress response, and we can see an increase in cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and this affects key areas of the brain, including the prefrontal lobe in our brain. And this is the area that helps us make rational decisions, the decision-making area of the brain. So we can see that the brain is wired to detect threats, so it becomes more sensitive to danger around us. We can see that children have more difficulty with their language, more difficulty with speech, difficulty in problem solving, or the readiness to learn. They have difficulty concentrating in school, poor academic achievements. Their behavior also change. We can see more aggression, more social distance, teen pregnancy, drug and alcohol misuse, risk-taking activities, or poor self-regulation overall. The relationships are also impacted. We can see more anxiety in the relationships, in the family, outside, in romantic relationships. They either repeat the cycles of violence, or just engage in relationship where they might feel like betray is happening. Also, understanding of social interactions. It's a poor understanding of social interactions. They might see people as like they might have distrust, not just for their peers, but also for adults and also for family members. We can go to the next one. Okay, so when it comes to the long-term effects of domestic violence, I like to think of the study, the ACE study, the Adverse Child Experiences, which happened in 1995. This study was done by the CDC. And the CDC, what they did is they took 17,000 adults and they observed them for 2 years. And the results were understanding that trauma in childhood leads to specific problems, including health problems, like heart problems, diabetes, cancer, chronic disease, also relationship problems. Specific to DV is a repeating pattern of abuse or being prone to abuse, negative coping skills like reads, risky behavior, alcohol, drugs. We can see academic difficulties, dropping out of school, difficulty finding or maintaining a job, and mental health issues. Also, this study, the ACE study, shows that those who had a higher number of traumas in their childhood had a shorter lifetime by 20 years than people that didn't have any trauma in their childhood. So we can see the impact of DV and trauma in adulthood, right? So what is trauma? Trauma has different definitions, but I took this one. I inherited this one from an old supervisor, and I really love it because it kind of explains specific what it is. So trauma is the psychological, emotional response to a deeply distressing, disturbing, and life-threatening experience. So a traumatic event can happen. There was probably a car accident or abuse, any shape or form of abuse, domestic violence, the death of a loved one, including pets, or maybe you had an animal bite you, or you went through immigration trauma or medical trauma. So when that event happened, we have a response to that event. And that response is what trauma is. So not everybody will have the same response. So what's traumatic to someone is not traumatic to another person. So a trauma can leave you feeling unsafe and helpless. It could be a one-time experience, or it could be a repeated experience, for example, domestic violence. And trauma tends to overwhelm our capacity to cope. So it's too much, too fast, too soon. And our nervous system is just overwhelmed. So witnessing a traumatic event, not just that we experience, but that a loved one experience, could also be traumatic, specifically for the little ones, for young children, as their sense of security is dependent on the security of their attachment figure. Next. So trauma and DV. Domestic violence is considered a chronic trauma. There's different types of traumas. We have acute, chronic, complex, racial, intergenerational, and more like historical trauma. And what we have to recognize is that because domestic violence is repeated and prolonged, it becomes chronic trauma. And then there's also intersectionality of complex trauma and intergenerational, because survivors of domestic violence tend to experience multiple layers of trauma. It could be, for example, that a person witnessed domestic violence as a child, then they experience domestic violence in their relationship. Maybe that included some sexual abuse, that's more trauma. Maybe they immigrated to another country, more trauma. Maybe they had an illness like cancer, that's more trauma. So layer upon layer, that would be complex trauma. And when it comes to intergenerational trauma, domestic violence is a learned behavior that passes down from generation to generation. So what we know is that when the trauma of domestic violence is unprocessed, it will pass down to the other generations and continuing with that. And the way that we stop it is by starting the process of healing and starting to talk about topics like today, right? Thanks. So some of the traumatic events, aside from domestic violence, I have mentioned already, it could be a natural disaster, separation from parents, losing someone, and neglect or physical sexual abuse. Next. Okay, so I'm gonna start to talk a little bit more about PTSD and what that looks like in children. So first we're gonna look at this video, and then we're gonna talk about more about the symptoms of PTSD.
PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is a psychological condition that can occur as a response to a traumatic incident. This includes threats of death or harm, such as
Are you seeing the video? Sorry.
Oh, no.
Oh, 1 second. I gotta pause.
Mhm. All right, we got it. Oh, wait, it's not there. We got it, we could just not hear.
PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is a psychological condition that can occur as a response to a traumatic incident. This includes threats of death or harm, such as war, sexual assault, violence, motor accidents, natural disasters, or medical emergencies. PTSD can be experienced in different forms and to various degrees. Remember that feelings about your trauma are always valid. With that said, here are 5 signs of high functioning PTSD. Number 1, extreme emotional reactions. Trauma can lead to what is called hypervigilance. Do you often feel anxious, stressed out, and on edge? You might feel as though you're constantly on high alert as a result of trauma that you've experienced. Do you find that you get startled rather easily? And on top of that, is your reaction to being startled unusually intense, even violent at times? Perhaps you feel particularly irritable and are prone to outbursts of anger from the strain of constantly feeling tense and on edge. It's one thing to be cautious, but have you been overly conscious of your surroundings and on the lookout for potential threats, to the point that everyday life becomes a struggle? Trauma can cause these feelings, habits, and reactions as your fight or flight response intensifies. Number 2, negative changes in thoughts and mood. Have you noticed certain negative changes in your thoughts and mood? This can occur in different forms. You may be struggling with recurring feelings of fear, horror, anger, or hopelessness. You might experience emotions similar to depression, such as losing interest in activities you once enjoyed, or feeling unable to experience joy and other positive feelings. You might have also developed negative thoughts about other people, the world, or yourself. Perhaps you've been feeling guilt and shame. Even though the traumatic incident is not your fault, you may have convinced yourself that it is. Number 3, avoidance. Trauma may leave you feeling vulnerable, on the edge, and unsafe, understandably so, which may then lead you to avoid and withdraw from certain things in order to feel safe or protect yourself. You might find yourself avoiding people, places, conversations, or situations that remind you of the traumatic event. Perhaps you've been going out of your way to take different routes or cancel plans with friends, even though you may have some desire to have a good time and see people. You may back out of situations or get away from certain people to avoid any reminders of your trauma, or perhaps because you're feeling too overwhelmed to socialize. Additionally, you may find yourself avoiding some of your own thoughts. All in all, the constant avoidance can be exhausting and take a toll on your mental health. Number 4, physical problems. You may also experience physical manifestations of your struggle with trauma, such as insomnia. Have you been having trouble sleeping? Perhaps your fears have been keeping you up at night, or you've been having nightmares related to the trauma you experienced. You may also experience certain physical sensations when you're reminded of the incident, such as increased heart rate, sweating, breathing difficulties, or feeling faint. Often tied to anxiety, these are signs that you may be suffering from PTSD. And number 5, reliving the trauma. You may have also been reliving the traumatic incident. Have you been having recurrent memories of the event? These may occur in spite of you trying not to think about it. As previously mentioned, you might also have nightmares in which you relive the event or dream about circumstances related to it. Nightmares are also different from flashbacks, in which you might relive the incident as if it were really happening again. These are signs you might be suffering from PTSD. PTSD symptoms can vary from
You can
case
stop it.
in terms of severity and types of experience.
Thank you, Maria.
Yes.
Okay, so that was a little clip for us to understand a little bit of what PTSD looks like, some of the high functioning symptoms. We're gonna go more in depth right now, but I do wanna bring the awareness that when trauma happens, when domestic violence happens, it affects how we behave, how we feel, how we think about ourselves and others. It impacts our body, and it's not in the screen, but it definitely impacts our family. It could be that somebody in the family experienced trauma, but it impacts the whole family. And also it impacts the way that people in the family relate to one another. They could become trigger for the things that they say or the way that they're relating. So they might feel like there's a lot of more conflict in the family and not understand what is happening, but it's most likely trauma and PTSD, right? So let's move on to the next one. So in this slides, we can see divide the symptoms in behavioral symptoms, emotional, cognitive, and physical. These are some of the symptoms that we look at when we assess the children to see if they have a mild, moderate, or severe level of PTSD. When it comes to behavior, we can see that they're having difficulty sleeping, changes in appetite. They want to stay away from family and friends, hitting, yelling, throwing things, self-harm. Self-harm can look like hitting themselves, or cutting, or trying to run away from the household, or it can look like using drugs or alcohol, fighting with family members, crying spells, constant crying spells, being startled out of just listening to a sound or somebody coming into the room and they're just jumpy. We can also see that in the little ones, like 5 years old, 4 years old, that they're talking repeatedly about the traumatic event. This is the way that they're processing. We can also see that in their play. Maybe they're playing more violent games. They're reliving those traumatic events through those games and play. They're refusing to go to school. And they're doing dangerous activities. When it comes to emotions, we can see them be more irritable, more anxious. We can see feeling of shame, feelings of guilt, depression, having feelings of despair, hopelessness, the empty feeling or feeling disconnected and numb. We can see that children have difficulty feeling happy. Also, like they might feel like this thing that happened, the domestic violence or any other trauma that damaged them permanently, or that they are unable to protect themselves in the future, so helplessness. When it comes to cognitive, we can see mistrust in others, irrational beliefs, worry about the traumatic events, recurring distressing dreams, intrusive thoughts and images that come to our mind when we don't want them to be there, questioning of their spiritual beliefs, difficulty concentrating, paying attention, worry that the event is going to happen again. When it comes to physical things, we can see stomach aches, headaches that don't have a reason to be. Like you could take them to the doctor and they're like, no, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're still having the symptoms, and it's most likely a PTSD symptoms. We can see fatigue, muscle tension, shallow breathing. Yes, so those are some of those are the majority of symptoms that we see in PTSD. Let's go to the next one. So I believe that we learn best through story. So I'm gonna say the story that I wrote for all of you, and we're gonna just play to try to find the PTSD symptoms, and then after I will highlight them. So the story goes like this. Charlie is a 9-year-old child. One night he had to call 911 to ask for help because his father was hurting his mother. He saw the police come. They arrested the abusive person in the moment. After the incident, Charlie refused to go to school. He had trouble concentrating. He kept distance from his friends. He no longer wanted to join family outings. He often snapped at his siblings and yells at his mother. He constantly looked around him to check the doors before going to sleep. He wanted to check that everything is locked, that the windows are down. At night, he tries to sleep, but he starts thinking. It's my fault that my family separated. My father could come back any minute. I could hurt my mom again. When he finally gets to sleep, he has nightmares. Charlie no longer pains or plays soccer. He has headaches and stomach ache frequently. He no longer feels happiness or love, but he does feel terrified when the memory of what happened comes to his mind and he feels like it's happening again. Charlie does not want to think or speak about what happened. He often has images of his dad being violent come to his mind, and he does not know what to think about. I mean, when he does not want to think about that. So these images makes him sad and angry. Charlie does not want to worry his mother, so he stays quiet. He does not tell anyone how he really feels. So in that story, I hope that all of you were paying attention and looking for those symptoms of PTSD. The ones highlighted in black are the symptoms, and it's a lot. Charlie's going through a lot. We see school refusal, trouble concentrating, distant from family and friends, snapping, which is irritability and anger. He's hypervigilant. He's not feeling safe. He's checking the doors for that. He has thinking errors and a lot of guilt. He's thinking it's his fault that this happened. He's thinking that this could happen again. That's another sign of PTSD. He has difficulty sleeping because he's just bombarded with thoughts at night. He's having nightmares. He has lack of motivation. What he used to like, he no longer likes. He has some somatic symptoms with the stomach aches and the headaches. There's emotional numbing. There's flashback. He's experiencing the event as if it was right now, like he's experiencing them. We can see avoidance. Avoidance is a big part of PTSD and trauma. He doesn't want to talk about what happened. And the image coming up to his mind of his dad being violent, those are intrusive images. So that cause a feeling in him that is causing sadness and anger. So we see a lot of changes in the children, a lot of emotional changes, a lot of behavioral changes. And sometimes when we're seeing these changes and we don't know about PTSD or we don't know how to name those, then we're just thinking, okay, these children are misbehaving, they're just rebelling, they're just not listening to us, right? But in reality, these are just trauma reactions. So let's go to the next page. Let me introduce you to trauma reactions so that we can take them also into consideration when we're working with children that have experienced trauma. So trauma reactions, we all have trauma reactions. These are the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn modes. These are the ways that we have learned how to protect ourselves from danger in the history of humanity. So when there's a danger, our brain has to assess quickly. Are we able to fight this? Or is it better for me to run away? Or am I just gonna play dead? Or am I gonna have to be in a position of pleasing another person, which is fun? When, let's say you're a child and you have somebody being abusive to you and you cannot leave this house, you have nowhere to go, you have no money to sustain yourself, so you have to be there and you become pleasing in order to be able to survive that environment. So to better understand trauma reactions, I would like us to explore the next page, and then we're gonna come back to this one. So this is the Dr. Dan Siegel brain hand model. So I'm gonna explain you what happens with the brain, and it's gonna give us another perspective. So if we take our hand and we put our thumb in the middle of the hand, and then we close our fingers, we have a functional model of the brain that can really help us understand what happens to our brain with trauma and in cases of domestic violence too, right? So going into the palm is going to, it's a metaphor for our brainstem. And the brainstem function is to keep us alive, to do things that keep us in survival. So that is swallowing, breathing, our blood pressure, our digestion. And then the thumb symbolizes our limbic system. So the limbic system is the emotional part of the brain. And we also have memory in here. So it's the amygdala and the hippocampus. But that's just fancy words to say the emotional part of the brain. And the memory is in here too. So these parts work together. And then when we close the lid, we have the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex, it's the area that helps regulate the emotional part and that helps regulate the brainstem. So it keeps everything nice and together. When the lid is touching, we're all good. We're balanced, we're calm, we're online, right? And this part of the prefrontal cortex is regulating emotion, is helping us concentrate, it's making us have rational decisions. So, but when trauma happens, or something reminds us of trauma, or somebody pushes our buttons, or something pushes our buttons, that lid comes up. And what happens is that that wise mind, the thinking part of the brain, becomes disconnected from the emotional part. And now we have this part with emotions, but without the connection of rationalizing or regulating those emotions. So when we're seeing children that are having trauma reactions, that they're hitting themselves, that they're cutting themselves, that they're running away from home, that they don't have the words to express themselves, this is what is happening in their brain. So we need to teach them how to lower that lid, right? So I like to think an easier way to think about it is the wise mind, the big emotions, my lid is just about to go up. And this kind of gives us a simple language to show. So when it comes to trauma reactions, they live in the big emotion area, in the limbic system. So let's go back to that other page. Thank you. No, the other one. Yes, yes. So when our lid goes up and we're disconnected, the trauma reactions start coming up. We could have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And what this looks like is, let's say they're in fight mode, shouting, screaming, hitting, throwing, blaming, connected to anger, irritability. Flight mode, they want to leave, run away, avoidance, restless. They might be having fear, anxiety. In the freeze mode, we can see they want to hide, daydreaming, blank mind. We're thinking, oh, this kid is just distracted, but they're just probably in a freeze mode, daydreaming, becoming silent, staying still. That has to do with numbness and fear, pleasing others, not being able to say no, saying sorry constantly. Those are another trauma reaction. So what we want to do is understand what brings the lid up. So we can go to the next one. And the next one. So what brings the lid up and disconnects our brain are called trauma triggers. So trauma triggers is anything that reminds us of past trauma. Triggers could be external or it could be internal. So externally, we can see sounds, maybe a loud sign, maybe a siren, maybe a specific song or specific instruments, or the voice of somebody when they're yelling at you, the way they say your name, that could be triggering for a child too. Because when it comes to people, maybe the person causing harm, ethnicity, or their race, or their height, or the way that they look can remind you of that trauma that you experienced. Where maybe places, if you're a survivor of violence and you were in the same room where a lot of violence happened, maybe that space could be triggering, or maybe the color of the walls could be triggering for that kid. So we have social media or movies or anything reports that remind them of what happened could also be a trigger. Those are external. Internal, we have thoughts, feelings that can be triggering, intrusive thoughts that come to the mind or intrusive images. We also have situations, and this is an interesting trauma trigger because when the trauma was happening, let's say you felt unsafe, anything that feels unsafe to you now could become a trauma trigger, and it could flip your lid in your brain. So they were left with trauma reactions. So we need to bring the lid down. So one of the words that I like to say and share, because my therapist shared this with me years ago, I love this word, is similar, not same. So when we are experiencing a trauma trigger, it's good to talk to yourself and say, okay, similar, not same. For example, if a person went through a trauma that where they had fire in their apartment, and then anytime that they see a candle is not the same thing as a trauma, as a fire in your apartment, but to your brain, the lid is gonna come up. And we have to remind the brain that this is similar, but it's not the same. So it's important to bring that person back to the moment and remind them that the trigger is not the same, that they're here and now. So let's go to the next one. So how do we actually keep the lid down and connected? So one of the first things that we have to know is that children and youth, if they have one trusted adult in their life, That's enough for them to thrive. Just one person that they can trust, that they can feel secure. So, and you can be that trusted adult. I know that today I heard that there was like 100 and something people that got into this workshop. And if all of us could be one trusted adult for one youth in our life, that could be a big change and a big shift. So how can we do this? We can do this by having active listening. And we do that by maintaining eye contact with the child, with the teen. We don't look around. We're not distracted by our phone. We're really paying attention to what they're saying. We can reflect what they were saying to us by saying, I hear you say, or let me see if I understand. And also it's the way that we're listening to them. Can we listen to them with love and care instead of trying to fix things? Because most of the time, the youth, they just want to be heard. They don't need the fixing part right now. They just want somebody that they can connect with, a safe space. So it's also important to celebrate the child. If there's a youth in your life that you're working with them or you're supporting them, celebrate their accomplishments, spend quality time with them. And I always hear, no, they don't want to talk to me. They just want to be in the room. But they do want to interact. It's just for us to put the effort and to find activities. It's not just like we're going to sit down and look at each other. That's not going to work. Let's find activities. Let's probably walking in the park, eating an ice cream, going to a movie. And hopefully in the middle of those activities, we're going to start conversations. We're going to start communication. Playing is super important, whether it is, because that's the language of kids, that's the language of teens. And that play and that imagination encourage the brain development. So it's super important for us to engage in play with children and with teens. So to keep those lines of communication, it's important to show interest on what they like. Are they reading a manga book? Or do they have a specific video game that they like? I don't know anything about video games, but let me ask them, what's your favorite one? Why do you like this game? What's your favorite part? And, let them tell you everything about it to continue opening those lines of communication. Also, it's important to nurture their strength. We can go back. Yes, so it's important to strengthen them. So if they like social activities, like if they like any sports, connect them to community workshops or community events, because they need to create social connections that will help them grow, that will help them feel safe. A lot of the harm happens in relationships, and a lot of the healing also needs to happen in relationship, not just in the therapy room, right? So we need to connect those youth to other maybe after school programs or art programs or theater programs. It's important to conform and reassure the child. A lot of children after domestic violence might feel unsafe. And it's important to let them know that as the adult in their life, you're gonna keep them safe, that you're taking the measurements to make sure that things are safe and okay. Sometimes giving hugs if they feel okay with that, or just letting them know, asking them what makes you feel safe, what space, what things make you feel safe, and creating that space for them. So also our voice is very important for children. The voice of a caregiver becomes the voice of the children themselves when they grow up. So this is how they're going to speak to themselves. So using a soothing voice, using open body language is important in the communication. We can go to the next. So now that you guys all know the signs of PTSD, it's important to notice it in children, notice those behavior, emotional changes, and know that these behavior changes are not because they're misbehaving or they're rebelling, but because those are trauma reactions. And now we can understand how those behaviors that don't make sense or don't seem logical are logical because of the brain, right? Their brain is flipped. So when we're seeing a child, you ask them to go clean their room and they're just flipping in anger. And now we understand that probably something about that was a trigger. So we really have to start uncovering the trigger and naming the trauma. Naming the trauma gives us, it's a way of taking power back, of saying, okay, this is what I experienced. This is what my family experienced. And it's important because sometimes we might be having the impact of that violence, but we don't know what it is or what it looks like. So we can put a name and a shape on what is affecting us and our family and the child. So we also uncovered the triggers. So what is triggering that child in your life? Is it the sound or the way the space looks or the way we're interacting with them? Or is there something at school that is triggering them? And teach those coping skills. So it's always good to ask, what is triggering my child? Can he notice, or she, can they notice what is affecting or what's flipping the lid, and teaching them ways to calm down. So we can teach relaxation skills. We can teach how to work with those negative thoughts. We can ask them, what's in your mind? What negative thought is coming out? Can we challenge that thought? Can we change it and make it a more helpful one? We can teach them to name their feelings, because that's another issue there. A lot of youth don't know how to name their feelings or don't know how to recognize it or what it looks like. So it's important to create those associations. And of course, we cannot do these things if we don't know how to do them for ourselves. So it's important to be a role model, learn these relaxation skills for yourself, share them with the youth, go seek your own mental health, because when it comes to kids, they know in authenticity far away. They can smell it from far away. So if you want them to engage in supportive mental health services and you don't yourself, they're gonna be like, what's going on here, right? So it's good to seek that mental health support too. And seek effective help. So a mental health professional that can help assess what level of PTSD the child has and that can guide them through the process is also important. You don't have to do this alone. Let's go to the next one. So we're not gonna leave here without sharing some coping skills that you can actually practice with the children in your life. And for me, the toddlers, I love the toddlers. This is an exercise that I use with the children in our program. And here we can see the smell the flower and the blow the candle. This is a breathing exercise. So what we basically do is tell them, okay, let's smell the flower, and they smell, and let's blow the candle. And it's very simple, but it's effective, and you can get them to breathe. There's many versions of that. It could be dragon breath, lion breath. You can use bubbles or a pinwheel for them to have fun in their breathing exercise. We also have the change the channel exercise. And that's basically when you're guiding, let's say, a teenager who's having difficulty with negative thoughts or unhelpful thoughts. You can use, make them think of what are the thoughts that you're having? Okay, maybe the child's thinking nobody loves me. How does that make you feel? Sad, lonely, depressed? How can we change the channel on that thought and create a new helpful one? What would that look like? The child can answer, okay, my mom gave me a hug this morning. That means she loves me. So then they're creating a new thought and a new feeling just by thinking, changing the channel. I have two more coping skills. And one is for intrusive thoughts, because when we see children that have experienced domestic violence, there's a lot of intrusive thoughts and a lot of intrusive images. So one thing that they can do is to visualize a stop sign in the mind. And after the stop sign, we have to visualize an image that has a lot of details. I personally like to use a sunflower because it has a lot of seeds, and I like to picture each flower in my mind. But we have to remind ourselves that not everybody is the same, and the coping skills work in a very specific way. So when you're using coping skills like this to help the child lower their lid, is basically you have to consider that they have to practice these coping skills when they're calm, because there's no learning happening in the brain if the child is not calm. So first we practice when they're calm, we build that muscle so that they can learn how to use the skill. And then when the lid is up and they're gonna practice a coping skill, that's when it's gonna work. And we also have to realize that these coping skills are like a toolbox. You can create your own toolbox. Some things might work for some people, some things might not work from other people, and some coping skills might not work in the long run. Like there's gonna be a moment in your life that this stop sign and the visualize the sunflower is not gonna work. We have to use a different one. So we always have to be in the lookout of new coping skills and trying different things that will work for us in that point of our life. The other coping skill that I love, I used to use this as a teenager myself, is to stop or slow down impulsive behavior. So when our lid is up, right, we want to make sure that we give ourselves time to close it and to relax. So we can use the acronym STOP. So S is for stop, T is for take a deep breath. You're already bringing oxygen into your brain. Observe, try to observe what's really happening around me, and then proceed with care. This saved me from getting into a lot of trouble. So I really give you this with a lot of love. And yeah, it can help us slow down and just give the teens some time to think about things before they proceed in life. Okay. So we have reached the end of our workshop today. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them on the chat. I know that that was a lot of information. Great workshop. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so I don't see any questions. If I see a questions, I will go back to it. Okay, wait, I see a question here. Are there any ways you're able to help child between ages 3 to 6 to feel grounded? Yes. So the flower and the cupcake that I share it's a grounding exercise that you can use with children. There's also an exercise that I like to use. It's called rainbow grounding. And basically is when you ask a child to look at different colors. So for example, let's pick green. Look around you, everything that is green. Okay, look around you, everything that is yellow, everything that is blue. And what you're doing is you're creating eye movement. And that eye movement is telling your brain that it's okay, that you can relax, that everything is fine. So, and that you're grounded here, present in the moment. You're more welcome. Yes, I see Debbie share another, the model of the hand by Dr. Dan Siegel. It's in YouTube. I super recommend for everyone to go see that one. All right, the recording is gonna be shared in our website, I believe, but we will contact you to let you know. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Okay, so they say, yes, we will try to share the recording. It's also saved in our Facebook Live. So some of the resources that I recommend is the crisis text line. The youth can use this. It's really helpful for them. They can text or they can go online or they can call and they can receive support, especially if they're dealing with suicide thoughts or self-harm or anxiety. But of course, if there's those thoughts, please call those suicide prevention hotline and seeks professional support. The National Youth Helpline is also for parents or for youth that can contact the helpline 24/7 to receive counseling. Yes. We can go to the next one. Okay, so there's also the resource of VIP, VIP Mujeres. Our helpline is 1-800-664-5880. This is our email and our web page. And they just share, I believe Maria or Chamela shared the presentation where it's gonna be saved. So thank you so much for joining us. It has been my pleasure to share all this information with you and also learn from all of you from the chat. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great day.